Hello, everybody. Hopefully, I'll make it through this video here. I was just doing one, and my microphone cord fell out, and I lost communication. Got all discombobulated. So hopefully, this one will go okay. Um, I'm not going to go through the outline today. I'll do that again on Tuesday. But just remember and remind you that you have a test next Wednesday. Starts at morning, and then you have till the next Wednesday to take it. All right. It'll be open book, so if you want to start gathering some things together and getting a little thing going, I'd advise it. And it's going to be on the first chapters to this chapter all the way up to the economics. I think the economics one's next, and I'm going to have a couple questions in that about sustainability and stuff. But it shouldn't be too many questions in that chapter. Okay. Also that climate change thing had a little bit of problems. I got a copyright issue on that, and I thought they would just blank that part out, which they did for a while, but then they totally took it down. I might go back and edit that, but I think a lot of you saw it already, according to my calculations on the Blackboard. Hopefully, um, that was mostly it was by climate deniers. That's what that whole video was about, right? So we were just about to talk about climate denial, and that's not right, and it should be taken out. All right, it's not even an argument. Okay, science, we either accept or we reject the null hypothesis. All right, there's not any both sides of the story. That does not exist. You either accept it or you reject it. And in science, we can do the experiments, and you can do all the experiments and come up with the same answers that all the climatologists have. Okay, you too can do those experiments. I know you're smart enough. Okay, and observe the same things they are observing and come to a rational conclusion. Now, what we want to do about it, we talked a little bit about solutions in that part. But as we go through here, believe you me, we're going to be talking about a lot of solutions, all right, of what we need to do about climate change, especially in the energy section, all right? And because when we left off on this video, we left off talking about do we have an ethical obligation to other species, right? And that's part of your ethics, and that's how you as an individual get to decide. I'm not going to judge you or berate you or any. You can decide what you want, all right? But that is a decision that we need to make as humanity, because we actually do a lot of we control a lot of species lives, right? And we can make just about any species we want extinct. We can harvest the whole oceans if we wanted to, take out every single fish. Right? We have that technology. Right? And many feel that all living organisms are have an inherent right to exist. And you're allowed to believe that. Okay. And I kind of believe that too. But I believe that in the diversity thing, I'm all about sustainability. So I always say that without biodiversity, biodiversity means resilience, and then resilience will equal that sustainability. Because if we have a lot of biodiversity in that one little region, it can withstand that impact. The populations in there can withstand an abrupt impact to that area, right? And it doesn't mean that they all will survive, but at least something might hang on and life will continue, right? But there's always that competition going on with inside the ecosystems itself, right? Excluding big crazy events. Um, and there's always winners and losers, all right? And humans have always tended to change ecosystems so that we can be comfortable, all right? We like to really manipulate them, right? We've changed every single biome's plant structure just about. We took the Great Plains of Iowa's grasslands out and put in corn, right? We have taken out some of the shrubbery and shrub grasses and little shrub trees that grow in California and have planted almond trees. All right. And believe you me, almond trees are not, they got the great temperature, but they don't really have the precipitation. So, but they got great irrigation systems in California that can get to that. All right. But we have changed a lot of different ecosystems around. All right. And we do this because we're generalists. We are able to adapt to different areas, not only because we have the capability of building houses, but we can eat a lot of different food sources, right? And we can use a lot of different materials, right? And there's two different types of species out there. We have the generalists and we got the specialists. Okay, and the generalists uh, tend to use many resources or habitats. Right, lives in many resources and habitats. So we got the mouse here that can go just about in any. I think they're on every single continent except for Antarctica. All right, and who knows? They might be there someday if it gets warm enough. But it's just too cold for anybody to live there. Geographically widespread, right? All the way up to um, they live low on the food chain, but have small and fast reproducing offspring. So a lot of the generalists too are going to these little rodents here are going to have a lot of offspring, right? Because they don't really nurture their offspring that much either. Okay, to the specialist who only lives in certain or lives on certain resources or in certain habitats. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be a certain resource for the food. Okay, but the habitats are usually located in certain areas, like the polar bear. The polar bear can eat a lot of different Arctic animals, but mostly seals, right? Or the panda bear lives in a certain habitat, and then that animal also only eats basically bamboo. Okay, and that's the only place where bamboo grows. Limited to a small range, not too much geographical range, but it could also have large habitats of wandering. All right, so an elephant, all right, only lives in certain little areas, but it's an umbrella species, and that area travels a lot of different distances. Same with the tiger. All right, it only lives in certain little areas, but it has a wide range. Right, these mouse don't live in, they're going a couple miles, if that, away from their home. Okay, a mile maybe. They also live in high on the food chain, need large areas of habitat, and the tiger's an island species. Many populations are declining, right? And as a population shrinks, it loses both the genetic diversity and geographical range, right? So the genetic diversity, there's not as many species. We're not mixing up those genes so that the next mutation can happen to make it stronger or more well suited for the environment. And also the geographical range is limited because the population is sinking in size, so it doesn't need that much areas, right? And it might not explore, it might become more consolidated in one single area, and due to habitat loss as well. The United Nations environmental program. So remember, the United Nations do not make any laws. Right? They just go around and they talk to each other. It's a place like the World Forum where everybody can come gather and start doing things. All right, and start talking and discussing things. All right. So this isn't, the United Nations really does not have any power to really change the world. They just it's a place where the world can get together and talk, and they decided they were going to make what's called the Living Planet Index, right? And they used the baseline year of 1970. So what we did is we put all the species on Noah's Ark again, all right? And then we walked them off two by two, okay? Instead of two by two, it was like 1,000 this, 2,000 of that, 1,500,000 of this, right? So we just counted everything we knew at the time, and that became the baseline of the population. We were going to see whether or not that population actually went up or down or stayed the same, or what was going on. Because we need some kind of baseline, right? We need to recognize some kind of population, right? And it doesn't mean that's good or that's bad, because sometimes populations can be too big and sometimes populations can be too small, too, right? It was just the number. And what we see, okay, so the black was a Living Planet Index, a total decline of the different species population around the world, right? Terrestrial index was probably I don't know if I would call it the best, but it didn't decline as much. It's kind of tied with the marine index. And you notice the marine index, the blue one here, kind of goes down and it's straightened off. All right. And this is a very interesting case study. If you guys are interested in sustainable economic models when it comes to natural resources, the fishing industry is probably one of the best um, places to look at, right? Because I don't know if you guys have seen The Deadliest Catch, right? And now those guys, not only was exciting, but they got to they only allowed to catch so many fish, and only during a certain time, and it has to be a certain size. And each fish has its different requirements, right? And you have to buy a license and all this other stuff. And once we did that, because we saw this huge decline, and I want the fishermen to work too, right? And what they realized is that they were coming back with less and less fish, and that meant less and less money, right? And they started realizing that they were overfishing it a lot. And once we started putting in some quotas and started really controlling the industry, you could see how this line really flattened out. Okay, and the populations have basically stabilized. All right. In some populations, we're not allowed to fish anymore, and hopefully they'll start bouncing back, and hopefully we'll see some of this marine come back in, all right, and start creeping up a little bit. But it's a very interesting case study of how people worked together and instituted some very important economic models that actually work. All right, it's the tragedy of the commons, what's called the tragedy of the commons of the fishery, but we can control the commons. All right, it can be done. We'll talk about that next chapter in the economics platform, what the commons is and stuff like that. Then you see the freshwater index. See how that one goes right down here? So it's the worst one of all, and that kind of makes sense. All right, because we don't really see what's in the water, but we can count the fish, kind of, right? We're smart enough to figure that out, fish populations. But this is where all the pollutants go into, right? When it gets out to the ocean, it gets a little bit more diluted, right? It's not as potent, right? So we got a lot more of that. I mean, you can see that happening in Florida with the nitrogen, or even Chesapeake Bay, right? Okay, with the case study of Chesapeake Bay, how the pollutant went in there, and we overfished the oysters. Putin got in there, and we had the algae bloom, and it all died down, and it became a dead zone because all the microorganisms took out all the oxygen, right? And that killed the fresh air. And that doesn't really happen that much in the ocean, those dead zones. It will happen in the Gulf of Mexico every single year, okay, believe it or not. But it gets cleaned out because it starts getting life into it, because the ocean will bring in some extra oxygen into that area. But the fresh water can't replenish that oxygen as readily as the ocean can. Okay, so there's also a thing called extinction, and this is what we're really worried about when we talk about biodiversity today. Not only populations will decrease, they'll eventually go extinct. And extinction occurs when the last member of a species dies and the entire species ceases to exist. All right. And this just happened recently. I think it was 2 years ago with the black rhino. I think the last black rhino up here died. They still have some black rhinos down in here, but the genes are different because of the geographical separation. All right, so it's not really the same rhino. Make sense? Remember we talked about geographical separation way back when? And the last one up here finally died off. Okay. Extirpation is a loss of a species from one area, and that's what we would call the black rhino. Okay, but not the entire world. The black rhino has been extirpated from most of its historical range, but is not yet extinct. So hopefully we'll be able to keep the populations that we have alive, and maybe someday repatriate them up to their native land up there, just like kind of what we did with the wolf. We went up to Canada and said, "Hey, can we borrow a couple of your wolves and see if we can get a population going here in the United States again?" And Canada said, "Sure, let's work together. Let's put these things two and two together, see what we can do." And lo and behold, we brought back the wolf into that area, and hopefully we can do the same thing with the rhino out here. But it's up to Africa, right? But that Tanzania is right here. Okay, so I'm pretty sure it's right here. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's right here because it's the Indian. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's right here, and we're going to be able to uh, protect it and hopefully bring it back in there. All right, because we know some of those countries are working really hard in Africa. I'm kind of proud of them. I am proud of them. I don't say why. Kind of. There's some countries that need some work to do, but there's a lot of good countries that are doing some good ecotourism and really trying to save the land. All right. Good case studies there. Extinction is reversible. All right. the whatever that dinosaur from Jurassic Park, it's not really possible yet. The human impact is responsible for most of the explorations of extinctions today. So, but these are processes also do occur naturally, right? And it's called the background extinction rate, and it's at a pace which organisms independently go extinct. So, it's about 1 out of every 1 in 10 mammals and marine animals going extinct each year. All right, so when we see the basic background extinction rate, we lose 1 out of every 1 to 10 million mammals and marine animals each year, normally. All right, and we notice this through the fossil record. All right, so we've seen mass extinctions events that eliminated at least half of the species on Earth. Okay, half of them gone. Uh, and theoretically, it's probably about 90% of all species on Earth have already been eliminated. But when you talk about, that 10% of species is very diverse. Five mass extinctions have already occurred, and we are said to be in the sixth mass extinction, as we discussed last lecture in that video that we showed with Nukiki. All right, we are definitely doing that through habitat destruction through the hippo acronym. We'll talk about next slide here, but you can see the different areas. All right, so we had the Cambrian area, and here we got the Jurassic area, with the dinosaurs probably the most famous. All right. Well, we've already had 5 different ones of these, and we can see that the rate of extinction is picking up pace right here during our time, our human caused extinction, and it's seeing like the same rate as the dinosaurs. So the current extinction rate right now is about 100 to 1,000 times greater than the background rate. That is why we are saying we are in the next mass extinction. Right? 100 to 1,000 times greater. And it looks like the same rates that happened right here, because it was nice and easy for a while, right? Hardly any, 1 out of 1 billion were dying off here, and here just bang, same way it is today. One out of 50% of all species gone. The International Union of Conservation and Natural maintains a red list, what's called a red list. And once again, the International Union of Conservation, nature has no authority over any animal, any country. They just go around and they count up the animals and say, hey, in our humble opinion, we think that this animal belongs on a red list, which means it's may go extinct. And you guys have, want to do something about it, the country needs to do something. The International Union of Conservation can't do anything about it, but help maybe come up with a plan, help them do planning and things like that. But they can't walk in there and tell China or us or anybody else to do anything. Okay, they just compile the list and give us that data, and then we got to take our own country's ethics and apply that science to that issue, and whether or not we want to risk the extinction of this animal. The 2017 Red List reported the following animals were threatened with extinction. 21% of the mammal species, 13% of the birds, 20% of the reptiles, 32% of the amphibians, and 14% of the fish. All right. Notice what's not on this list is insects. Okay, because we can't really get a good grasp of the insect extinction rate because there's so many of them. All right. But like I've talked about before, we think that the insects. I think I told you the story about Germany, when they, they do the bug collections. They have a community science group that every year goes around and put these nets out there, and they collect all these bugs when they fly around, and then they take the little bag and weigh it, and they do it by body mass. And they've been doing this in different regions of Germany for years. I mean, for 20, 25 years. And recently, they've noticed that their body mass that they're weighing at the end of the catch season is lower and lower. That means there's less and less insects out there. There's a lot. There's a good video on YouTube, Splatology, I think it's called, where this guy actually, you can recognize the splat of a bug on your windshield, and you can figure out what it was. And they use that now to go around and try to catch and see how many bugs they drive into, and they rate the population that way. So they'll go down through, a place where there's a lot of bugs in the south, and drive down the highway for a while, and then count the bugs on their windshield, and do that over and over and over and over again to collect the data. Crazy, craziness. It's a pretty interesting video. So these are the groups that don't have enough data to make a global assessment. Okay, but we're trying. Scientists have come up with innovative ways. So habitat loss. Okay, when we talk about biodiversity, I suggest you use the acronym HIPPO: habitat loss, invasive species, population, um, pollution, overharvesting. All right, and we're going to actually have to add in the C somewhere. I don't know what I'm going to have to do. So maybe to call it CHIPPO, right? Climate change, habitat loss, invasive species, population, pollution, and overharvesting. Maybe I'll call it that, all right? Because we got to add in the climate change. But habitat is probably the greatest threat to biodiversity today, all right? And it's not about pollution or everything. The animals have no place to live. All right, and we need to, like I said, the ethics. Do they have a right to exist? If they have a right to exist, or if we want them around, they have to have a place to live. And we have done so much. Humanity has really displaced a lot of animals. Okay, and we have altered and degraded and destroyed habitat through urban sprawl, farming, grazing, clearing of forests, and damming of rivers. We've done a lot of different things. All right. So a habitat loss mostly occurs through gradual piecemeal degradation called habitat fragmentation. So it never really happens at once. Penn's Woods was really woody at one time, but slowly but surely we have whittled away at Penn's Woods. Okay, so now we have Cook's Forest. I think Cook's Forest is the last old growth forest that we have. Great place to go camping and just hang out if you guys ever want to go relax in Mother Nature and walk around a forest that has that web underneath, with the mother trees and all that stuff. Go out and check that stuff out, man. Ooh, it's good stuff. This makes habitat smaller and prevents movement of organisms. So we start off with our original big patch, then we move in, and then sooner or later we just got there, and then suburbs will be around here, and this will be a golf course or what have you. All right, and the species disappear due to habitat fragmentation. All right, so they can't start getting around, and they got nowhere to live, and next thing you know, they're doomed. Habitat loss has affected every single biome in wetland and being especially threatened. I mean, it every single biome, all right, with a wetland, it's been threatened because those wetlands. We drained out the wetlands in Florida and put Mickey Mouse there, right? So it's crazy how much wetland loss we have. I remember I talked about not even through development of Walt Disney World. I'm not saying Walt Disney World's a bad thing. We can have it, all right. Let's just do it more environmentally proper. And Disney is believe it or not, making strides to do that, all right? Because they want tourism in Florida just as much as everybody else, and they don't want the rot. And they're part of that trying to get the waterways put back so that algae bloom and all that stuff doesn't happen as much in Florida. But also the wetlands in Louisiana. We talked about Louisiana losing its boot. All right, those mangroves are kind of like wetlands. They're more oceanic wetlands, all right? But they're trees, and there's a lot of life in those areas. Okay, and habitat loss is primary source of population decline in more than 80% of the birds and the mammals out there. There's also pollution. Okay, and that harms organisms in so many different ways: air pollution, noise, water, agricultural runoff, persistent pollutants of heavy metals, plastics in the ocean can strangle and drown and choke marine animals. All right, so the pollution is something that we can at least see. It's hard to see climate change or global warming, but we can see pollution. We know when things get polluted, it affects us as well. We are just like the bears and the antelope. We like to play, but also we get affected if we have too much lead in our bodies. So good thing that we have noticed that, and we use what's called generally considered safe standards here in the United States to control these kind of pollutions. All right, even noise pollution. You're only allowed to have so much noise out there. All right, believe it or not, right? You can't be banging on your drums at 2 o'clock in the morning. Your neighbor's gonna get a little bit mad. Except my neighbors. My neighbors might get mad, but they're pretty far away. But I bang on them pretty loud. Also light pollution. All right, and this is just putting light out into the air, right? So the cities, you can see them from space, right? Um, so we have done a lot of good stuff trying to control this, and I'm kind of glad for those things. We'll talk a little bit about the EPA, when that was founded, and how we do that in the next section. Our growth in population and consumption is leading us to remove species faster than rates than we can reproduce. So we got to eat, and we love our fish fillets, and that's a great Atlantic cod. And we have fished out a lot of cod out of the Atlantic, and lo and behold, some of those fisheries are now in danger. All right, because we needed to feed our population. The more mouths we have, just like we talked about like in the first chapter, more mouths we have, the more resources we need just to just to get our needs met. All right, that's just the way it is. But we have been taking out more fish than they can reproduce, and other things like trees. The story of the Lorax is a true story. All right, the valuable trees like teak and mahogany are disappearing quickly. Gorillas and other primates killed for bush meat could face extinction. Okay, so these gorillas will just get eaten just to get some money. And what Africa has done is started doing ecotourism. So instead of killing the gorillas, let's see if we can get people to come out and see them. Oh yeah, it's fun. It's hard to see a gorilla. I don't know if you're seeing the gorillas, but you're going out and seeing all the other stuff, right? At a safe distance. Many ocean fish stocks are harvested. Great sustainability stories in here, and economic models and stuff like that. How we've caught it in time of some of them, not all of them, but a lot of them we caught in time, and hopefully with some hard work and some let's stay off and let's let them do their thing, and make a little bit more. Maybe someday we can get back to some of those fisheries. Um, Thousands of sharks are killed each year for the fins. You guys ever hear that shark fin tuna or shark fin soup? Right? Well, just pull out the shark and just take off the fin and throw the shark right back in. It's crazy. Pennsylvania, I think it was 2 years ago, Pennsylvania banned shark fin soup here in Pennsylvania. Poaching is also a problem. All right, it's illegally killing a wildlife for meat or body parts. Probably the most popular is the ivory for the elephant. Right, we killed the elephant. And I don't think anybody's even eaten any elephant. Right, and just kill the elephant. This majestic, beautiful looking animal, a keystone species, total keystone species. Who's an umbrella species who needs a lot of area. All right, to roam. All right, very important to the ecosystem in Africa or wherever it's going to keeps the shrubs down and all this other stuff. All right, and a very smart animal. I mean, it mourns its dead. All right, it knows exactly where the watering holes are, the patriarchs and matriarchs. Okay, very important animal in the balance of nature. But we would just kill it and take off its tusks. And you see all these right here. These are actually probably poaching that they found and are collected too, because they will actually, um, to keep the animals alive, they'll actually shoot them, tranquilize them. They would come up and cut off the things, and then that will be it. And then the tusks eventually will go back. All right. But they just do that so no one would come and take the tusks and then take it and burn it. All right. Craziness. Then there's also invasive species, non-native species introduced to new environments can proliferate and displace native species. We talked about the carp, all right, that problem we'll have it here in our fresh waters, all right, of the Americas, okay. But there's a lot of other ones, the Nile perch, the emerald ash borer, right? Which was discovered in Michigan in 2002. This wood boring insect reached 12 U.S. states and Canada. So I don't know if you guys understand the ash borer that's going around here in Pennsylvania. The ash trees are getting decimated. I got one that's totally gone here in my farm. And you're not allowed to actually, believe it or not, part of the regulation is that you are not allowed to carry any ash wood for firewood or anything like that outside of your county. Yep. So if I cut down that ash tree, I couldn't sell it for firewood to somebody else. That would have to be in my county. Believe it or not, it's crazy. But that's how we're kind of going to control it because we're trying to stop the spread of this. But I think it's kind of futile. I think it's done with. I think the ash borer, they got the temperature and they're loving it. They got no natives, they got no competitors, and they're just going to be going to town. Okay. Species native to islands are particularly vulnerable as they have been isolated from new parasites and predators and competition. So, island species are definitely, if something gets on there, like the brown tree snake gets on an island, they will take out all the birds. There are some uh, islands in the South Pacific that have been had everything disappear. So the island of Guam has disappeared, eaten by all the snakes. They have no birds, basically. They have no birds on Guam, believe it or not. All right. Hawaii is very diligent about the brown snake. So every package that comes on agriculturally or stuff like that gets inspected for a lot of different parasites, but also especially the brown snake or a tree snake. They have like these little cute little beagles at the airport. They go and sniff and try to find these little critters. Right? I mean, Hawaii is desperate. Oh, not desperate, but they're doing a good job to protect their ecosystem because their biodiversity down there is important because of tourism. Think about it. All right, if there was no birds, and we would probably still go to Hawaii, but it wouldn't be the same. All right, but there's also other things that they try to protect from it because that's a great ecotourism. I mean, tourism is their number one thing, and going to scuba diving is ecotourism. Climate change is also hurting biodiversity, with the warming temperatures causing some of the shift in their range, causing some animals to shift their ranges and closer to the poles and higher latitudes, like that boar, that ash borer, and also the um, beetle that we talked about in the pine forest. Okay, but you can also notice, the polar bear, which is the kind of one of the symbols for climate change. I mean, where's this guy gonna go? He's kind of unique to this area, and he can't go hunting in the Rockies. He probably could live there, all right? But he ain't going to get too much food because he stick out like a sore thumb. That's why the black bear is black and the polar bear is white. Okay, and they grew up, and the two species hence can't have fertile offspring. There's some geographic separation, and each became a specialist or a generalist in their little area, right? A keystone species, I should say, in their own little area, top of the food chain. Um, Many species, multiple factors are contributing to the decline. All right, so it's not just one. It's not just climate change. It's not just pollution. It's not just um, uh, habitat loss, but habitat loss is number one. And usually, sometimes, that's it. You don't got any place to live your beat. All right. Monarch butterflies are declining because of the loss of the milkweed due to the herbicide used in habitat loss in their overwintering forest in Mexico. So not only the monarch butterfly is a specialist, it will only lay its eggs on the milkweed, and milkweed has been decimated too. All right. If you ever guys see any milkweed, don't touch it. Just let it be, and maybe get some of those seeds and spread them around some more. All right, for the butterflies. But they also got hurt for habitat loss down in Mexico for their overwintering in the forest. So the forests are being cleared for agricultural use and urban sprawl, and they have no place to go and hang out during the winter. And since they have a smaller habitat, that can't hold carrying capacity, that can't hold a huge population, so the population shrinks. And then when they get up here to the north to do their thing, 5 years later or 7 years later, whatever it is, they have no place to lay their eggs. Sad days. And the worldwide collapse of amphibians is also due to a perfect storm of factors, including habitat destruction in the ponds and wetlands. Okay, the chemical use and pollution. So they're right there in the fresh water, right where all that pollution washes right in. Right, and that's where they live. They live right where the highest concentration of pesticides. Right when they're entering the whole marine ecosystem. Right, and then invasive species are choking out their lives. The carp are there taking over their habitats, and there's other animals that will actually eat them now. There's other fish that will that eat their young, so they're not surviving. Right, the invasive species that are eating their young. Climate change, changing just the temperature, and disease as well. Conservation biology is the study that seeks to understand the loss, protection, and restoration of biology and diversity. So when we listen to the podcast coming up next week or whenever, I think it's due in 2 weeks because we got a current event and then a test and then the podcast will be due. You'll listen to some guys that one of the guys was a conservation biologist, his PhD, and he was down, I think, Costa Rica, one place, and that's what he did. He studied the loss, protection, and restoration of this forest down there due to climate change. Pretty cool job. Conservation genetics determine the minimum viable population society. Population size. So how big does the population have to be so that it keep on keeping on? So if it gets too small, then we're not going to be able to, keeping on. So how small a population can become and how much genetic variation it has can lose before encountering inbreeding depression. So, how far does that what's the tipping point where a population won't jump back? The carrier pigeon is an example of this because we used to go around just shooting bang, 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 carrier pigeons like they're going out of style. And we decreased the population so much that it never was able to bounce back. And we saw that because it was a terrestrial animal. But we're also noticing that in the fisheries, and that's why the fisheries are very concerned that we might have made, there's still some of that, Atlantic cod for a better species to talk about. Still might be some pools of those populations around, but is it big enough to get back to where it was? Right? Because you need like that 51% to really make it grow. All right, if it's 48%, that population might not grow the same rates and might actually start decreasing slowly over time. And it's not a big wipeout, it's a slow decline of the population size when this kind of stuff happens. So by determining the size, we can help the wildlife managers make plans for increasing population size. So, but knowing that tipping point, we can actually recognize this and put them on the Endangered Species Act, right? We need a way to actually say why are these guys endangered? And one of the reasons they're endangered is that the population is not at the right size to keep a stable population. So the Endangered Species Act of 1973 offers protection to species that fall in two categories. And this is just for the United States. Every country has their own Endangered Species Act or what have you. Right? So the Endangered Species Act is not the UN's same stuff that we just talked about. Okay, just for us here in the United States. So endangered or in danger becoming extinct in the near future, or threatened, likely become endangered soon. So this is the worst of the worst, and this is the almost the worst. All right. So the Endangered Species Act forbids the United States government and citizens. So the government can't do things too. The government can't go and put a new military base somewhere because they think it's what they want to do. They got to abide by the Endangered Species Act as well. So you as a citizen, right, we the people or the government, we can go and do what we need to do. All right, protest. And we take them to court and they take us to court and all this other stuff. Good stuff. All right. And citizens, so also you got to abide by the laws from taking action that will destroy individuals within identified species. So as of 2016, we've had 1,229 species listed as endangered, and 367 were listed as threatened. All right. Early success of the Endangered Species Act included the recovery of the bald eagle. All right, no one wants to lose their flagship flagship species. Right, so flagship species is just something that gives you a good warm fuzzy. Right, and the bald eagle gives me a warm fuzzy to be an American. Right. The peregrine falcon, the brown pelican, and other birds following the ban of DDT in 1973. So I don't know if you guys know the story of DDT. I'll talk about it a little bit in the agricultural section. All right, a little bit more complex, but basically we were spraying this stuff out all over the place to kill some. I think it was our herbicide, and it got into the water system and all the way through, rippled through the food chain and built up into the fish, and then the all hunting predatorial birds were actually falling prey to the same thing that the bald eagle was falling prey to. All right, they were eating the fish with the DDT, and then when they were laying the eggs were not properly germinating. The shells were all soft; they weren't even hard. It was like coming out of rubber, right? So they won't have any offspring, and very scary, right? Thing. But we'll talk about that a little bit more or DDT and pollutants a little bit more in the agricultural section. But I think we have two eagle camps here in Pittsburgh. You can get on the internet and watch them. They won't tell you exactly where their nests are, but you can watch the two eagle families because they come back every single year and see. Last year, I think they both had offspring. All right, and we'll see what happens this year. I think maybe one didn't make it, and one did. All right, but it's pretty interesting. Every spring they come out, and you can check that eagle camp. So federal authorities are spending under the ESA expired in 1992 and has not been reauthorized since. Believe it or not. Great Congress. As a result, the number of species judged in need of protection have not been added to the law. All right, so we have not really done too much with this. We still have our laws and regulations, but we haven't been doing what we need to properly update the lists. All right, and sometimes you don't want to take an animal off, and sometimes people want to put one animal on. It